Conscious leaders put people first, but so do conscious companies. I spent 7 years of my life working at Skyrun Aspen, always joking that it was my public service subsidy. And they walk this. During COVID, Skyrun helped short-term rentals transition to long-term housing so locals had a place to stay and owners could keep their homes. And when the time was right, they helped us shift right back as a community. If you're looking for a vacation rental company that leads with care, then Skyrun is it. To experience their commitment to community and care in Colorado, use code HOP15, that's Healing Our Politics 15, for 15% off a stay. Whether for yourself or someone in your community, check the link in the show notes for more.
Hello, my name is Skippy Mesereau, coach, former elected official, and lifetime public servant. Welcome to Healing Our Politics, the show that shows you, the heart-centered public servant and political leader, how to heal our politics by starting with the human in the mirror. It is my job to sit down or stand up with the best experts in all areas of human development, thought leaders, coaches, therapists, authors, scientists, and more, to take the best of what they have learned and translate it specifically for the public service experience, providing you actionable, practical, tactical tools that you can test out today in your life and with your teams. I will also talk to leaders across the globe with a self-care practice, getting to know them at a deeply human and personal level so that you can learn from their challenges and journey. Warning, this is a post-partisan space. Yes, I have a bias. You have a bias. We all have a bias. Everybody gets a bias. And I will be stripping out all of the unconscious cues of bias from this space. No politics, partisanship, or policy here. Because well-being belongs to all of us. And we will all be better served if every human in leadership, regardless of party, ideology, race, or geography, are happier, healthier, and more connected. This show is about resourcing you, the human doing leadership, and trusting you to make up your own damn mind about what to do with it and what's best for your community. So, as always, with love, here we go.
Welcome all to the Healing Our Politics podcast, the show that shows you, the heart-centered leader, how to heal our politics by starting with the human in the mirror. This was a fun episode for me. In today's episode, I sit down with public servant Damien Williamson, longtime friend, a 2024 Bard Environmental Defense Fellow, creating sustainable solutions at corporate and policy levels. Damien is a Harvard graduate, fancy, who grew up in an impoverished part of Chicago and had to fake his parents' identity and walk miles through dangerous streets just to get into the school that made his life of service possible. We dive into the mental toll and opportunity of living in multiple worlds, using our calendar to create freedom, how to break free of cancel culture to improve your well-being, nihilism as a precursor to purpose, and how a career-ending mistake became a life opener. I hope you enjoy this wide-ranging conversation with my friend, Damien Williamson. Welcome, Damien.
Thanks, Skippy.
So I am super excited to be with Damien Williamson today. Damien is a pretty long time buddy now. And I will say, maybe less famously, star on Bold and the Beautiful, which is where we initially connected, and maybe that should go to the top of the LinkedIn page if I have my druthers. I will share, I've brought a special cup for you. I stole it from Jamie, but I want you to know that we are all a spark from source. Beyonce is a spark from that source. I am a spark from that source. So basically, I'm Beyonce.
I love it. Yeah, that one really speaks to my soul. So if I'm a part of the same source as Beyonce, then we're doing something right.
I know you are. Welcome, brother. Welcome. I would love to kind of just start at the beginning and have you share a little bit about where and how you grew up, and just tell us a little bit about kind of your origin story.
I grew up on the south side of Chicago, surrounded by a lot of violence and and a lack of ambition for, the people that were immediately around me. But I was very fortunate to have a grandmother who, I guess, either saw some spark in me or just naturally just kind of gravitated towards wanting to help me get out of the situation that I was in. And, I jokingly asked her in fourth grade, how do you get out of the ghetto? And she responded, well, you got to go to Harvard, baby. And, and I think it was less just about the institution that it was, and just that, education was my path. And, while you may know me in a more athletic era, I was certainly the sweater vest wearing chubby kid with the roller backpack in grade school and high school. So I can't say the typical dream of the NBA was in reach to me. But that really set me on a path of like, okay, if this is my avenue out, how do I focus all of my energy towards that? And so it was Saturdays, it was summers. I was enrolling myself into educational programs at the University of Chicago and finding out about upward bound math science programs in sixth grade that I could kind of attend. And so I think having someone who just supported that dream, and God, this kind of connects to so many things, but just having one, a person that supports you, two, someone that could mentor you in the right direction, just the impact that has had on my life. And I mean, there's lots of other decisions that came after that, but that really, really was the core that kind of set me on my path.
I mean, fourth grade is a young age to have that kind of self-awareness, to even ask that question. And this is going to be a very strange parallel, because I'm not sure it's even parallel, but fourth grade also happened to be the age where I went to my mom and said, I want to go to Weight Watchers. That was what was going on for me. Was I was really overweight for the first time, and
I could have used that also, by the way, but we could have teamed up. We were,
but to the point, you had some more pressing issues that I didn't have. It was a privilege to have the majority of my brain trying to solve problems on my weight problem, right? That wasn't the case for you. That was, I'm imagining, kind of somewhere down the line. So what do you think it was about you that made you the type of kid that would ask that question? Or is that something that was commonly asked, but there wasn't a person for others to ask it to?
I have thought about this a bit over the years. And I mean, I think it's, obviously there takes a certain level of precociousness or awareness at that young age to be asking any of these types of questions, even of yourself, because fundamentally it was like, how do I change my condition? And that condition varied. And, in terms of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we were at very different spaces of what we needed to be full, whole humans. But I mean, knowing you, I know that if you had been arbitrarily put into my situation, much as I was arbitrarily put into my situation, you might have been asking these same types of questions. And I even saw that my siblings, who were as smart as me, whatever that means, as savvy as I am, they didn't have someone. I was the last grandchild, and my grandmother then had the space or the time where she saw what didn't happen along the way. But if they had had that support, they could have been different. But they also had 2 or 3 kids by the time they were 18 or 19. So by that time, it was a little late for them to make those changes that could drastically shape the beginning of your life. And not to say that, you can't, make changes later. But I think just that awareness and the timing and just who I was actually, being gay and not interested in having children or women at that age, like all of that came into play. So it's just it's a timing thing and less of something inherently special about me, I would say.
So how much of that is just chance?
I mean, God, all of it's chance. I mean, I kind of said like where I was arbitrarily born, impacted so much of my life. I mean, look at what's happening in the world right now, and which side of one line were you arbitrarily born on in the Middle East, and how that's impacting someone's life right now. And so, of course, I think that there's some sense of determination or skill involved in it, but God, so much of it's luck. It's like,
I'd love to really dive into the specificity of this experience because it's true. When you talk about the line, whether that's the line between a country in the Middle East or otherwise, these things are true. And I think for me, they are relatable. Like I can imagine had I, just been born, in a slightly different zip code, what that would mean. And I think that most people can connect with that, but it's very abstract. Whereas if you think about the nuclear family, like you and your siblings or you and your classmates, whether it's chance or not, but the role that these small upstream differences early in life make for the probability of outcomes later in life. And I say probability specifically. Can you speak to that? Like, can you bring us into what the experience is like for an individual growing up in that environment and how, in your case or other cases that you've observed, some of these small things have a really big impact on the potential outcomes over a lifetime?
Very small question you're asking there, Skippy. But I mean, it's only really relevant because I was able to kind of transcend growing up in the ghetto, living on the south side of Chicago, escaping that cycle of poverty and violence and all the things that I was able to get out of. Now, having had that experience is what is kind of my superpower. It's like I have this perspective on reality that everyone's life is not like mine, has become. I don't have everyone doesn't have these opportunities that I had. And so in one sense, like being born into what I was born into was one of the main driving forces that kind of catapulted me out of it. But everyone shouldn't have to work so hard just to live a good life. It's like, as you kind of mentioned, like you had very different priorities when you're in fourth grade, but, I didn't even know it at the time, but like, our lights were getting turned off left and right. And, I didn't even know what a latchkey kid was, but I'm wandering home from school every day, alone. And I'm standing on top of stools trying to cook myself, almost burning the house down. And so there's these things that I had just normalized in my life that didn't, as a child, I should have been able to just focus on enjoying my life, learning these things about the world that would kind of connect me to people later on. But I didn't. I had to develop this kind of scrappy, get it done on my own mentality that, which served me for a while. But I think ultimately it just took me away from becoming as full of a person as quickly as I could have, I think. But how do you ultimately look back and say that it didn't work out, that it wasn't the way it was meant to be when you're happy with where you are? And so it's a hard question to answer coming from a place where I'm genuinely happy. But if I talk to some people I grew up with who weren't able to escape that, they're going to have a much different perspective on what it was like growing up where we grew up.
Yeah. For someone who has not spent any time in a neighborhood like yours growing up, what is the experience like, not for someone who, quote unquote, made it out, but for, the average outcome? What is that like?
I mean, the average outcome is, worst case scenario, you end up dead. Either from gun violence, domestic violence, by the hands of the police, or you end up in jail. You have so few opportunities for personal, professional, academic advancement that crime is most profitable when you have no other options. And, most of my family members have spent some time in jail and certainly my extended family, if not my immediate family. And, when you come back out of that system, it's even more hopeless to kind of turn your life around because then you're marked with this, scarlet A. And so like that limits your opportunities even further. And so that becomes a self-perpetuating cycle of crime and violence and loss and death and imprisonment. And so, just to find one point to interject into that cycle, you can really kick people out of that loop.
Yeah. I frequently hear the misunderstanding of because there's a Damien or because there's a Barack Obama or a Michael Jordan or whatever, that the problem's solved, right? Like that it's fine. Like, obviously it's doable. And so nothing to see here. Can you speak a little bit to why that's not the case?
There's nothing more harmful to the cause of equality than a token individual who made it out. It's like, and precisely as you said, people use that narrative as, well, if they pick themselves up by their bootstraps, yada, yada, yada. It's like, people don't have boots. So they're not picking themselves up by their bootstraps. And watching the exception to the rule and like putting that up on a pedestal, that's great. That's awesome. You can see that there's a pathway. But once again, it shouldn't be so hard for someone to find a path out of this. Like, I should not be spending my entire childhood focused. I shouldn't have to be this precocious fourth grader, that happens to have a supportive parent or grandparent. Like, this shouldn't be the norm that it takes to get out of these situations. It shouldn't be an exceptional intervention.
Yeah. And hearing you talk about that, my first reaction was Damien had boots, and his boots were grandma, first and foremost, and a higher than the median aptitude as well. By definition, the average person won't have a higher than median aptitude. And even within your own family, it sounds like you were really the only one who got grandma in the way that you did. Is that true?
It definitely is. And I mean, there's some other family things that happened that I was actually technically only my grandmother, because I have a lot of half siblings in my life. And, she was actually showing up more in my life because my other grandmother was actively not showing up in my life in the way she was showing up into some of my siblings and my cousin's life. And so even that became its own additional boot, in a sense where it's like, she wanted to help me even more because she didn't feel like it was even. And so, you're right. I mean, I recognize the privilege that I have growing up where I grew up so much, because I think even more than the aptitude is just someone who gave a shit about the outcome of my life. I think that was the biggest contributor, and so many people do not have that.
And so what is that next jump like? You put in the work, you take your standardized tests, you go to, I'm guessing, a magnet school of some kind, or you have some accelerated education track, and then you end up in Harvard at college, which is I imagine, a completely different world. What is that experience like?
Well, yeah. And I mean, first off, I kind of started off at just a regular high school that was very close to our house and on the south side of Chicago. And just to the point of why that it shouldn't have been so difficult. I went to my parents because I had met a kid who had gone to a very nice prep school. And he was kind of telling me about the programs and the opportunities and the trips and just the level of passion in the teachers. And, I go home to my parents and I try to tell them about this. And this is where I want to go to school. And they weren't listening. We don't have the money for that. That's not us. Those rich white kids. They get to go and do that. And I just kept nagging him. And it wasn't until we had a random metal detector sweep at the high school I was at, and they found just countless knives and guns. And, then I was reflecting upon the fights in the hallways, and I knew I had to get out. And so I, without my parents' knowledge, found a way down to this prep school, get out the map of Chicago, and I figure out the bus route and the train route, and I go down, and I actually had my brother call and pretend to be my father to reserve me the spot in the exam, and I pass it and get that whole thing, and actually ended up having to rifle through his documents to get all the tax forms to apply for scholarships. And that, once again, these are all, how many extra steps are this just for me to get a type of education that other kids were getting naturally. And anyway, so I eventually transferred myself to that school without my parents' knowledge. And on the first day of sophomore year, I tell them, this is the new school I go to now. I need some new clothes. And that was my first entree into this new world. And this school felt like, what I imagine Harry Potter school is like. It's like the massive pillars and the incredible dining hall and the library with the beautiful columns and the statues and, and so just that world, it felt like, I'm look at me, I'm doing it. I'm getting into this. I'm seeing this new world. And then Harvard was, God, what a whole new evolution of that. But more than anything, one of the things I realized very early on is that being from these other places, from well-off white families, that did not make you happy. That did not that did not mean that your life was easy per se. It was just different. But once again, I would still rather have your problems knowing that I had food on the table and that the lights would stay on. And so I would still choose these other problems over mine because mine were so immediate to my survival. So, but once you're there, I mean, you're still just a college student. You got to explore and think about whatever you wanted to. And it's just these kids who are all young and figuring out the world, doing it together. And so while that world was so different, it was still a very welcoming environment. You know, I've had the luxury of, I've chosen to put myself into places like that. So
the Damien that I first met was incredibly gregarious and big and funny and energetic and took up space in a beautiful way. I can't imagine putting you in a room or a setting where you don't just shine naturally. And I got to know you as that Damien, to the point where I was like, my insecurity was like, I'm not cool enough to be friends with this dude. And I thought that for a long time. And so that's, full disclosure. And I wonder if that's just innate in you, or did the chubby sweater vested kid who showed up in this new environment have a different orientation to others?
Yeah, no, that was not ingrained in me. I think I say it was nice to kind of hop into these worlds, but there was a lot of insecurities that came with that kind of imposter syndrome that was, natural and for anyone in most situations, but let alone someone who's traversing these rungs of society and socioeconomic classes, to always feel like you're that little poor kid from the ghetto. And I think at some point I just stopped wasting energy on that. It felt like focusing on my inadequacies was dimming my light, because if I'm focusing on those, I can't be focusing on shining brightly. And there was a moment, and God, I mean, Aspen is so ingrained in my character and so many things happen in that place. But that's one of the biggest lessons I learned, was just to shine brightly, and you will attract the right people. And so I think particularly in that time, I was really figuring that out. And so I just became particularly bright. and so,
correct.
For better or worse, I should say.
Full sparkle pony.
full sparkle pony. So, but that's about kind of, you gotta play with the boundaries. You have to go big to figure out, when to hold back. And along that journey, I became comfortable taking space, but then I became comfortable making space for others. I'm finally kind of dialing it in terms of that. Were
you ever afraid of overextending in your bigness?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I think quite frankly, I'm happy to have survived my grow bright phase. It's like I'm happy that I found the edges of the wall and I bounced back adequately. And, there's some specific moments that changed that. But in general, it was just experimenting with what happens if I keep doing this, or if if I'm this ridiculous, I'm this loud, I'm this big, or I'm this bold. You test those boundaries, and then sometimes you realize, you've got limits. And I think realizing that in terms of just my own behaviors, but then also my relationships with others, and realizing how I damaged some because I wasn't as thoughtful in my shining as I could have been.
Yeah. Did you have a vision for what you wanted to do post-college in terms of employment at that time? And can you kind of take us through where you thought you were going and then how you ended up in Aspen?
Never really thought about it. And that was a problem, because, when you're in survival mode, you don't really have time to envision what the best case scenario looks like. You're just running away from something and not towards something else. And I think that defined the first 2/3 of my life, really, or more, which is just actively running away from things. And only now am I really focusing on, okay, what do I actually want to do? Who do I want to be? Who do I want around me? Do these kind of visioning exercises where I think about what my life looks like. And so even how I came to Aspen, I mean, it's all beautiful serendipity and just making the decision in front of your face. So, as I was graduating, a lot of people ran away to go do finance in New York. So I ran away to go do finance in New York with them. And then I did it and I hated it. And so I ran away from finance in New York to one of my college roommates was living in Aspen. And I went and lived on his couch for a month before I kind of got into, media and marketing and that whole thing. So, fortunately, when you are adaptable, which I think is my biggest strength, you encounter a roadblock and then you pivot really quickly. Like you don't mope around, or there's a little bit of self-pity, but very brief. I mean like a night. It's like you suck it up, you learn this lessons, you have some pity, and then you figure it out and you move on and you figure out the next thing. So that's always been my path.
It's interesting hearing you talk about that. I wonder if the greatest privilege of growing up, quote unquote, privileged in a higher socioeconomic area is that you have the lanes in the bowling alley are filled with the bumpers, right? All the safety is there so that you can just focus on how do I get those 10 pins down as opposed to how do I fix, the hole in the floor where I tripped coming in to roll the ball the first time? How do I worry about the lights not going out, not having food at the concessions? And so you actually get the opportunity to focus on the vision and the impact if you choose it, where someone who doesn't come from that area is doing so much triage, for lack of a better term, that it is just highly reactive. On the flip side of that, because you've had to amend the bowling alley in this weird analogy that I've come up with.
I like it. I'm following. I like your bowling alley. Yeah.
You've picked up so many appreciable skills, and you've really also ruled out in action what you like and don't like, and you've been able to take risks because they haven't been risks to you. Sleeping on the couch, you're like, yeah, I'll sleep on a couch. Whereas someone who comes from a privileged place, many times they might want to sleep on the couch. They might want to move to Aspen. They might want to have that friend, but they're so concerned about judgment from their parents or someone else that they went to school with that they're sleeping on a couch that they never do it and never take the chance.
Yes. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, it's such a double-edged sword, but that's the thing that, once again, I kind of mentioned earlier, is that like, if you make it through, in the convoluted bowling alley analogy, if you become a good bowler from my side, then you're going to be better than the best from the other side. It's like, think of what you had to overcome to become that. And I think that's kind of how I look at my life. I'm so fortunate because I said this is, yes, there is some skills that you've had and some advantages you've had, but so much of it's luck that I'm lucky to be on the side where my background is now an asset as opposed to a liability.
Yes. I mean, it's that there are more Olympic ski racing champions from the East Coast where you grew up skiing on ice, but there are way more Olympic athletes from the Mountain West where the conditions are good.
Exactly. What's another good example? The Williams sisters. It's like you think about them in that environment, and it's like who became the best ever, and that's how you kind of think about it. But once again, that obscures the fact that for most people, their background is still a liability to them, and it's not going to help them get ahead. Like I'm sitting here on a podcast talking to you about triumph over adversity only because it to some extent it worked for me.
Sure. And our job, I think, is to not confuse or conflate the survivorship bias of looking at only those people that end up on a podcast and thinking that things are fine, and that if what we want to actually do is support the greatest human flourishing, you want to make sure the base conditions are as such that as many people can flourish and experience their potential as possible.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's like, then it comes down to the deeper question of how are you building out your societies? And ultimately that's because you need to build it out to take care of the people that are situated the worst, because those are the people who need the most support to then become the biggest asset to society. It's like the rest of the people in the top third, the top half, the top 3/4 are already well positioned to become good citizens, to become good humans, to become good stewards of our planet. But it's the people without that access, without that education, without that background, without that support that need it the most. And that translates and is parallel in every function of our society.
Yeah. I want to start to move into that, let's call it last third of your life where you've started to identify and act in that place of higher service. But to get from there, A to B, what are some of the inflection points that were really important for you? And perhaps the listener can use those as, hey, this worked for Damien, and maybe there's an opportunity to kind of systemically make those types of interventions or experiences more available so that more people can have the opportunity to have a similar experience of growth.
It's such an interesting question because there's the very intentional inflection points where I feel like I had a lot of agency over them, either the causes or the reaction. And then there's others that I had no idea the choice I was making was going to have such a big impact on my life. And so there's obviously the, busting my ass educationally to get to Harvard. That was going to set me up for success. But, how do we broaden that as an issue? I mean, hell, I don't even believe in higher education in the way that it exists right now. So like, if I was redesigning a society, that wouldn't be a metric by which that could be an inflection point for someone.
Well, the way I would think about it, just from hearing just what you've said on this podcast to date is, and I don't know if this is true, so you correct me if I'm wrong, but you had the idea of, I want to be educated, but it was actually grandma who planted the seed of Harvard and nurtured that seed by sharing with you the belief she had that you could do it.
Yes. I love that.
And so that is something that is scalable, right? That is something that a lot of mothers and grandmas probably don't know they have the power to do.
Yeah. Thank you for that kind of distillation and that kind of changing my thought process on how I view that, because that really is the root cause of that particular decision. So there's that. I think moving to Aspen has changed many a person's life. I think unbeknownst to me, that frustration with New York City and being in finance there, or I guess here now, close to where I am now. I think Aspen, it started with running away from one thing, but it really became running towards that mind, body, spirit ethos and the community and the connectivity and the one with nature, and all of that was huge.
Can you explain mind, body, spirit, where that comes from, what it is, and how you lived it for someone who's never heard of that?
Yeah, so this is kind of an idea born out of the Goethe bicentennial in the late 1940s, early 1950s with Goethe, and kind of the founding of the Aspen Institute and the Aspen idea of, it's these kind of three pillars of existence, both for you personally, but the community as a whole, and connecting with your mind intellectually, connecting with your body physically through the activities we engaged in, and then spirit, which can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people, but most generally is kind of that connection to something greater than yourself and the beyond and the unknowing. And I think these three things take on different meanings for people, but just recognizing them as three distinct things that are interrelated in your life and that you need to kind of bring balance into them defined the 20s and early 30s of my life in Aspen. And that was the single best progression at that time, I think, of my soul.
Which generally showed up for me of running into Damien on the street corner and be like, hey, do you want to do X, Y, or Z? And he's like, nope, 4-activity day.
That's funny.
Which meant something like, I'm going to go for a hike, and then I'm going to do yoga, and then I'm going to go to some like team sport activity, and then I'm going to go dance or whatever. But that was like 4.
No, it was always, it was how many could I squeeze into a day? And I haven't lost that entirely, but that's still, maybe it's 2 to 3 now.
I hope you never do. You've just supplanted activity 3 or 4 with maybe more sedentary.
Yes. I'm I have to respect my body now that I'm an old man.
Now that you're the owner of these 2 new hips.
Exactly. That is correct. I do have 2 new hips, listeners.
And they don't lie.
They don't. Never have, never will.
Yeah. So actually, so for someone who is in public service in some way, whether they're doing environmental policy or they're a mayor somewhere and they're trapped in the hamster wheel of there's always more to do, all of this stuff is super important. And the story they're telling themselves is, I don't have time for my body. I don't have time for my spirit. I just need to push, 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 push. What did your experience teach you about the merit of that perspective?
One thing I really try to live by is, the whole concept of not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. Just do something in that regard. Like if you're just recognizing that you're out of balance in these three pillars of your life, that's the first step, it's like, and so you have to just recognize that. And then it's like, okay, I'm going to take a walk today. I mean, you know what I mean? It's like, you don't have to, if I didn't achieve my 4 activities that I'd laid out at the beginning of my day, I'm not going to consider myself a failure anymore. And in a while, there was probably a time and space where I would have, I was been like, I'd be upset at myself. I didn't finish that. Or I didn't get to this talk, or I didn't get to, check in with this friend, or I didn't get to hike this because something came up, or I didn't finish this job at work. And I think not letting myself go down that cycle of, you didn't do it all perfectly, so then you failed the day. I mean, it's like, it's just such an absurd thing. There's so many minutes in the day, so many hours to turn it around, do something different. So I think that was one of the biggest developments as I was navigating finding that balance was, you have tomorrow, hopefully.
Yeah. And since you are in New York, well, you're upstate as well, but when you're in the city, what are some examples of intellectual, physical, and spiritual experiences that you are currently finding valuable?
Oh man, the city is great. It's a hard transition after Aspen because everything is so concentrated and easily available, and you really have to be diligent about pursuing the things that fulfill you. But, fortunately, I've got a good network there. And, when I'm in the city, it's always like, what show can I go see? I want to go see something on Broadway. I want to see a musical. I want to see some theater off Broadway. I want to go to a dance performance. What of my friends are in town from the Aspen Institute, and they're giving a talk on the identity trap. And that perfectly tied into my, MBA coursework. And then I'm bringing up these concepts in every conversation I have because they're on top of my mind with people. And so then I'm getting their feedback on these intellectual topics. And so it just becomes engaging everyone and the ideas that you're talking with because of that, rising tides raise all boats. And so here we are all talking about these ideas, and then you're talking about these ideas, and you're bringing your perspective that I didn't know about, and then you're taking that back to your partner and your students or your classmates or whatever it is. So, and then, physically, I get out of the city to go. I get my ass back to Aspen, or I get upstate and I hike with my dog or out on the river, whatever it is. So it's, I find balance in New York City really challenging. And so my life is very fortunate now that I can find that in other places. And so that balance that I was talking about, it doesn't have to be an everyday balance. It doesn't have to be, I do a little bit of all these every day, but I build my week or my month out so that it has all these components in it.
How do you do that? What does that process look like?
Yeah, so the past week, for example, I spent 3 days intensive residency at school, 12 hours a day. But that meant that I was going to stay in the city with a good friend who just moved here from Hawaii, actually. And I canceled my meetings and my plans that I thought I was going to do after residency to catch up to completely have a day in the city with this friend. And we went to MoMA and we, ate dumplings, and then I pushed my train back again, and we went out to went and caught the show that I caught, and then we had some drinks and we just chatted, and then I pushed my train back again. It's like and then I get upstate and I'm having the time. What was the first thing I did this morning is I got out with my dog and I cleared my head to create space to have this like great conversation with you. And then I've got my meetings, and then it's like, well, I've already got my trip back to Aspen booked to go and commune with the mountains. And it's like, that's how I think about it. And you naturally know when you're out of whack. And so I'm pre-planning ahead also. So it's like you have that flexibility to change things as they go. Like what I changed all my plans for my friend, but I know I need to get back to Aspen. And so that's been on my radar for, 2-3 months. I knew I was getting back on this date.
Yeah. So I'm hearing that through experience, you've identified these kind of various buckets of your life that are important to you, and that you are intentionally planning ahead for those, but you're also in the moment getting that biological feedback, emotionally, somatically, and otherwise, and are willing to shift and adjust those plans based on your needs on the day-to-day.
Yeah, precisely. And it was interesting. Someone on one of my Slack channels for school just sent something out about, do you have any tools for planning and how are you fitting everything in and all of this? And I came to this realization that planning out everything and having everything on my calendar, and this is something that I think you probably discovered a while ago, it actually gives you more freedom.
Oh, yeah.
And this is something that I was listening to Venus Williams talk about recently too, and she said something along the lines of discipline gives you more freedom.
Absolutely.
And because you only get what you want through discipline. And so I brought that into my calendar, and it's like I put everything, my social events, my personal events, my self-care, my school, my work, stuff with my partner, and I map this out because once I view this in totality, one, you start to see these common threads and what is helpful, what isn't helpful, where the gaps are in my day, where I have time for spontaneity, where I have time to shift what is important. And so doing that and being more diligent about my schedule has given me all the time in the world.
Yeah, a little bit of upfront planning can go a very long way in experiential outcome. And
Yeah.
with clients, I will frequently do exercise. The whole thing takes, an hour of actual work to do, but I will have people bucket the things that matter to them in their life. So it might be their primary employment, their, new project, their volunteer hours, their time with family, their workouts, their meals, their, fuck off time, like whatever it is, get your 5 or 50 buckets that are important to you. I have them list them in order of priority, and then I have them take a blank calendar and plug it in. So this is an ideal week. It's not the perfect week that you can only do once, but it's like if every week had to be the same, what would that look like? How would you split up that time? And I'll have them block schedule the calendar. And then they just throw that on the shelf. And then I say, okay, for the next 2 weeks, I just want you to make sure that everything you're doing is in your calendar, right? So whether you had pre-planned it or not, when you're doing it, put it in there. And that's great. Then they come back 2 weeks later and you put the two things in front and you tally the total time spent in each bucket in your ideal calendar and then your lived calendar. And you just look at those numbers next to each other. And it's often very, very instructive and a good precedent for making those choices ahead of time.
Yeah, that's been a huge thing for me lately. And I mean, and it's still like I know you probably aren't as good at this as I am, but doing nothing sometimes is so a part of this whole process. Oh man, it's like I thoroughly enjoy my down days. I'm like, this is going to be a worthless day, and I'm going to, and I shouldn't even use that language because I shouldn't even call it worthless. Like, this is going to be a re-energizing, resetting day to clear my batteries. Sometimes even with modern technology, you still have to restart the computer sometimes.
Yeah,
and it feels like that. I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to have a hard reset today.
Yeah.
And now, a quick break from our sponsors, and we'll be right back to the show.
Leadership is about making tough calls under pressure. The key is knowing who to trust. When Aspen faced short-term rental and zoning challenges, I turned to Skyrun Vacation Rentals in Aspen. They gave it to me straight and trusted me to do what was best for our community. With their help, we crafted balanced regulations that strengthened our economy, supported locals, and preserved our character. If you need expert guidance in a time of STR or zoning challenge, give them a call. And to experience their commitment to community and care in Colorado, don't take it from me. Use code HOP15, that's Healing Our Politics 15, for 15% off a stay, whether for yourself or someone in your community. There's a link in the show notes. Feel free to pass it along.
The Healing Our Politics podcast is brought to you by the Elected Leaders Collective, the first leading and most highly recognized name in mental health, well-being, and performance coaching for elected leaders and public servants, designed specifically for you. Now, don't be fooled by the name. The Elected Leaders Collective is not just for elected leaders. It is for all public servants, staffers, volunteers, government, nonprofit, whole organizations. This is for you. If you are filled with passion for improving your community and world, but are tired, as I am, of the anger, stress, and vitriol, if you find yourself banging your head against that same wall, struggling with the incoming criticism and threats, arguing with colleagues who are supposed to be on your team, and questioning if it's even worth it anymore, then the Elected Leaders Collective programming is specifically for you. With the Elected Leaders Collective, you will learn to become a hashtag political healer, building the authentic, unshakable confidence and courage to stay true to yourself through the anger and pressure, while cultivating the open, empathetic mind to meet others with the curiosity, compassion, and kindness necessary to respond to threats, improve challenging relationships, de-escalate conflict, and bring people in your community together to solve real problems and get shit done. You'll reduce stress, anxiety, and overwhelm and become a more effective leader while having time for your family, yourself, your health, and your wealth, sleeping well at night, and showing others they can too. Now that's leadership. Healing Our Politics listeners receive 10% off all Elected Leaders Collective services using the code hashtag political healer. Use it today and become one of the brave political leaders healing our politics. Use code hashtag political healer by going to www.electedleaderscollective.com and starting today. That's www.electedleaderscollective.com and starting today.
So I mentioned Harvard, Aspen. I think, as you know well, I had a pretty big kind of plagiarism scandal with a food column I was writing for the Daily News. And boy, did that turn into one of the biggest inflection points of my life, because I got to think about authenticity and honesty and showing up as the person I wanted to be, my role within our tiny community and how that looked.
Can you tell the story specifically of kind of what was going on, what happened, your reaction, and then the learnings?
Yeah, so basically I was writing a small town food column for one of the newspapers in Aspen. And I'd had that job for years. I was the arts and entertainment editor, and I had taken on a new job as a magazine editor at the time, but I just kind of kept the column. It was nice. And it just started out as I would go and kind of glance over some old columns for inspiration. Like, what kind of stuff were they writing about? What can I kind of take from that? And that's how it started. And then it may have been a night where I was out too late and my column was due, and I was like, all right, well, I'm just going to directly steal that theme or that topic and write my own thing. And that just slippery sloped its way into stealing paragraphs at times. And, I justified it always. And, one, it didn't matter. It was a small town paper, or, oh, it's just a couple columns. Like, what is, what is an idea? Who has original ideas? And so I was able to just justify my way into stealing from someone else's intellectual property, and got caught. The guy who I was routinely taking from, and it was a handful of columns. We had a power outage in his town or something one day, and so he literally was reading some old Daily News physical newspapers. And I love how random and serendipitous all that is as well. But all came to light, and it was front page news in Aspen. And it was great. It ultimately, obviously, it was a hard fallout initially, and who am I? Am I going to be a pariah? Are people going to talk to me? I'm going to work in this town. Well, those are all immediate concerns. But then I pretty quickly, once again, like I say, I always do, I turned it around and I saw it as this like necessary shattering of ego and veneer and pretension and the person that I thought I was and wanted to be and what I wanted to do. And I was like, all right, asshole, you screwed up. You made this huge mistake. Where are you going to go from here? How are you going to show up? What do you want to do? And what is the person you want to be? And do you want to be the kind of person that has principles? And I think a bit of that goes back to my childhood, because I had to be ruthless in my pursuit of getting out of my original condition and position. And I had failed to adequately adjust the fact that I no longer had to live in this, just make that extra money and do this or whatever and justify this to get to that. I never transcended that justification for my actions mode. And so I never realized, I never looked around and saw the new landscape. And that moment forced me to do that. And it forced me to say, is that the person you still are, or have you grown? And I decided to grow and decided to create a new value system and principles and a vision for my life. And without that happening, how long would I have been on that path? Who knows?
What were the stages of grief, right? What were the stages of fuck, I've been caught, to stage 1, stage 2? What would you have named those stages of just internal processing, and what were the periods of time that they took for you?
The first was, okay, how do I lie or configure my way out of this? And I think that was the first. It was like, let's throw some more crimes on top of that crime to get around it. And it was beautiful. I think because the nature of the relationships I had built in Aspen, and I still have, I had a really great friend who literally whisked me out of town into her compound and was like, you know what? I know the person that you are. This is not going to define you. Don't let this define you. And then I'd had several gatherings of friends, and the best one was a friend, Mara, and she came up to me and she was like, you fucked up, right? She was like, you need to feel that, first of all. You fucked up. But I love you, and now figure your shit out. And it was very beautiful. It was a really great moment where I was like, this doesn't define you unless you let it define you. And unless this is the last thing you do. But no, it's not going to be. So how do I, once again, do what I've always done, take all the experiences that I've had, and then flourish and blossom into this new person? And so it was quick. It was, it lasted a week. That's probably my longest moment of self-pity was, but I was surrounded by such good people because I had built authentic relationships and I got to rely upon that.
And did the fear of judgment from others or losing friends or job opportunities, did that lapse within a week as well?
I was afraid, again, to be looked at as that poor black guy from the ghetto that cheated his way to the top. And if that was going to invalidate all of the other experiences that I had. And that probably lingered for a little while. And it took a while to figure out my next direction, which I guess is another inflection point that came a little later. But yeah, I think I wavered because I didn't know how to show people that I was ready to be a new person. And I just knew that I needed to quit caring about that and then start actually focusing on being a good person as opposed to caring if people thought of me as a good person. And so that was a real key switch to, no, it's not about, because on some level perception is reality and they're perceiving me that way is because of my actions were that way. But if there is this interior person inside of me that's different and growing and better, then show them that by my actions and not through my words, and to not care if they got it because the work would speak for itself.
I find, I don't know if you would agree with this, this is certainly universally true amongst humanity, but it seems to me extra acute these days in the public space where the tendency is to judge a person by the worst thing they've ever done, to assume that people don't change or learn. And as a result of that, the humans who are doing some of the most important and time-sensitive work that there is are so afraid to make a mistake, to say the wrong word, to step out of the box at all, that they can, in many ways, unintentionally or intentionally, stifle their own growth. And, you talked earlier about playing outside the lines of the box, getting really big, maybe too big, being over here, being over there, trying this, trying that, having the opportunity to do that and really living as, a verb in the parlance, right? Like as opposed to a noun, it's this changing person. And I wonder if you can just share anything from your experience on the importance or the merit of fucking up.
It's interesting, and I love that I'd been outside of the active learning space for some time, and I mean like a institutional sense. Like I said, I'm back in school now, and I love how all the topics seem so perfectly timed for my life now, And so one of the biggest ones that's come across is the whole idea of punishment versus accountability, and I think this speaks directly to your point, is that we've become so obsessed in this culture and the gotcha moments or the cancel culture, or however we're referring to it these days, that we lost the humanity of the fact that everyone screws up. Everyone is making mistakes. If you're incapable of learning from your mistakes, then sure, whatever happens to you, then I'm less concerned about it. But if there's a way to bring you back into the fold, to restore the damage that's been caused, then let's do that. And this just came up at school, actually, because we had a bit of an N-word scandal where a professor used it twice in a class in a way that was not instructive. And in my mind, rolled off her tongue a little too quickly. And, there was a whole thing. It was like, let's kick her out and blah, blah, blah. And she actually was one of the founders of the sustainability program that I'm in. And she's a, bit of a, rock star in the sustainability world, but she's like 70. And, with that comes some antiquated ideas and notions. And of course, the immediate calls were like, get her out of here, cut her out from the program, cut out the malignancy immediately. And my thoughts would have probably been the same before kind of grappling with some of these new ideas, or at least new to me ideas. And I'm like, well, look, like, is she just a 70-year-old with some occasional 70-year-old ideas about how the world works and things you can and can't say now? Is there a way to have a conversation with her, like as a community, as opposed to putting one of our elders out on a on a boat and pushing her out to sea because you fucked up once and you said some letters in the wrong orientation, whatever it was, or whatever.
Burn the witch.
Exactly. And not to say that she shouldn't know at this point the history of the word and what that means, particularly in an academic setting, but did we try enough or hard enough to get to that restorative justice in a sense? And I mean, I know the answer for what we did in our community is no. I also don't know for sure how willing she was to change, because she was, pretty vocally stubborn. But I think it's our job as a community to try harder, because what are we really fighting here? We're fighting hate. We're fighting intolerance. And if you're fighting intolerance with intolerance, it seems. And so, and I'm not saying it's easy. It's not an easy thing to do by any stretch of the imagination. And people are impacted differently by words, for example. But, as a society, we got a lot of work to do on finding ways to bring people back into the fold of righteousness.
Yeah. And that mob, quote unquote, is coming for you next, right? Whether that's directly or indirectly. And I think about my time, on city council. Sometimes it came directly, but the indirect one is almost more pernicious. It's the mob that's not actually in front of you, but it's the mob you're imagining in your mind that might come, that curtails your speech, that keeps you from being intellectually curious, that keeps you from being fully honest, that contributes to the degradation of public conversation. And it's actually diverse viewpoints that are imperfect, that are untested, meeting in a public forum that is a prerequisite to solving really challenging and intractable problems. And so I don't think any of us want to live in a constant state of fear, want to live in a place of feeling under the thumbnail of social pressure. We also don't want to be in a place where we are, targeted or hated or these other things. I wonder what advice you might have to someone who would like to have us step into a more honest and authentic way of relating, a more human way of relating. How could one do that? And if their teacher gets called out, or their mayor says something stupid, or their director of sustainability got quote unquote caught having a good time with friends on the weekend when they weren't at work, how would you encourage them to think about or respond to that situation in a way that can be healing and humanity forward?
I mean, I think a lot of it is, what is the outcome you're trying to achieve here? Once again, are you trying to punish the individual for screwing up? Or are you trying to create a learning opportunity so that people don't screw up in that way again? And I think focusing on the latter, focusing on outcomes, is really the best approach to life. And thinking about intention. I remember doing some of the school discussions we had surrounding the, N-word scandal in class. Some kids would come in with fire and fury with their conversation, with their comments. And others would say, look, I'm not a black student. I don't know how this personally impacted me. And please help me, because I'm trying to figure out what this means and how this impacts people. And then finally, knowing when not to center yourself, because it's not just about your reaction to something or your group's reaction to something. Knowing when you centering yourself is productive to move the topic forward, or when it's a distraction from getting to the root of the issue. That becomes the most crucial kind of element for me when having these conversations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that self-check-in of, is this about the thing or is this about me?
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. For someone who's listening, who's like, how would I even know that? Maybe they haven't done any self-development work. That question is foreign. How would you notice that in yourself?
Mainly, and in almost every situation, there needs to be a pause between the incident and my reaction to it. Sometimes that pause is very small. Sometimes that pause is, before I send that email or before I stand up and think about that comment that I'm about to make in this public forum, just take a beat and try to hear it from outside of yourself, or take you out of the room, or take you out of the situation. And what would my response be? Or how could someone view this if they thought this way? And this kind of goes back to the beginning of this conversation, with that ability to put myself into many different shoes has come from a lifetime of experience. And so I can put myself in the position of that teacher, because I have seen a lot of people like her. I do know that person, and I've had really great interactions and friendships and communications and dialogue with people like that. And I can put myself in the position of that rich kid I might be his only black friend. I can do that because I've known a lot of those people. And I can put myself in the position of the person who is in this institution or in this space and that feels insecure, who feels like an imposter, because I have been that person. And so, one, get out there and meet more people and travel more, I guess, is my first answer. That's screw all the rest of it. Actually, that might be my number one. Go hang out with people that don't look like you in places that make you feel uncomfortable, and then you'll solve a lot of these problems.
Yeah, couldn't possibly support that more. It's so important. And the other thing that I would add, just as a liner note to that, is the greater the trigger, the greater the information, that the arrow needs to be pointed at us first.
Yeah.
Right? If you are super on one, if you're at a 11 out of 10, that's the body's way of telling you that there's something deeper going on inside of you.
Yep.
That you have the opportunity to think about and dissect first before taking it, turning it around, and throwing it at somebody else.
Yeah. And never has someone yelling at me been a convincing strategy. So and never has me getting fired up and yelling at someone else been a convincing strategy.
That's right.
So the people who are able to calmly present their idea and their viewpoint and their sides are the ones you end up respecting and listening to their opinion. So emulating that.
That's right. And it's precisely evidence to the fact that the person that is in the highest degree of screaming, that it is about them and it's not about the outcome. Like,
right.
There's some internal story, some pathology, some fear. Generally, it's driven by fear that is causing this fight response, but it's really intended to protect yourself. It's not intended to resolve the situation, even if that's not consciously aware to you. And so when you can, kind of take that energy, turn it around, and start asking the questions of where is this coming from? What do I actually want to see?
Yeah, it's like you're attacking the idea. You're not attacking each other. And I think, better phrase, you're critiquing the idea and you're not critiquing each other, I think, and separating the two, because if you really get down to it, I've been called, an N-word with malice by someone. And my response is always, oh, baby, what happened to you? Like, where did we go wrong as a society, or who harmed you, or who? I'm like, what happened? Did you not have any black friends in school? Are we too segregated as a population that this is the first time you're interacting with someone like me? And to go deeper and ask why you're feeling that way and why they are responding that way, because you always get to something else. It's always some daddy issues or mommy issues or poor educational system or segregated society or injustice and inequality. Every single time it comes back to some other root cause. So.
I was listening to, on a hike out here maybe a month ago, Terry Crews, the actor, who was talking about how he grew up in Detroit. He's also a black man, and famously with giant muscles, and played in the NFL and all these things. But for the first significant portion of his life, when someone would call him that word, he'd punch him in the face and knock him out. And the vast majority of that time, he would either get in trouble or be very fearful of getting in trouble legally for that action. So it was actually, a negative potential outcome for him. But after having gone through some traumatic stuff in his personal relationship and being in therapy, he had this breakthrough moment where he realized, and I'm obviously paraphrasing from this, but he realized that the punch outward was the physical representation or outcome of his belief at some level that the statement was true. And that when he realized, oh, I'm not that thing, that's a made-up word that has nothing to do with me, then there was nothing to be angry about.
Nothing. Yeah.
And then his response, rather than the punch, could be what you said of like, oh, what's going on for this person?
Yeah. I mean, it's always something going on. That's great. That's I hadn't really heard that story. So that's
I mean, it's the old anecdote, right? It's like you can go up to Bill Gates and call him poor, and he's really not going to be bothered because there's no part of his belief structure that believes he's poor.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so if you have that type of visceral reaction, or I have that type of visceral reaction of something, it's the opportunity for me to go in and question, oh, where am I agreeing with this statement? And how can I free myself of that by doing the inner work rather than responding in a way that will keep the condition in place and probably lead to worse outcomes for both me and the person I'm responding to.
I love that. It's like eliminating these limiting mental models for yourself that then allow you to kind of transcend a lot of that, which is pretty magical.
Yeah. Yeah. The last question that I always ask on this show is, our listeners are not passive observers. They are the people in the trenches. They're creating the climate policy or enacting the climate policy. They're teaching the students. They're working with grandma. They're delivering the turkeys on Thanksgiving, whatever it is. And I wonder if you had just one thing to leave them with that would best resource them to be that individual vector for healing our politics, for healing our public space, whether that's a quote, a thought to leave them with, a practice, something to do, could be anything at all that would most resource them to be of service to others and help heal our politics. What would that be for you?
I'm kind of reminded of how, you helped me reframe my grandmother's contribution, and not that I'd ever thought nothing but highly about her contribution to my life.
Thanks, Gam Gam.
But the impact that a show of support can have on someone's belief in their own ability to impact change. Just that little bit of positive encouragement to someone that you think is on the right path might just be what they need to keep going. And so give it out liberally to the people you think are on the right path. There's no cost in supporting someone's dream. And, sometimes it's just saying, you're doing a great job. Skippy, I think you're doing a great job.
Oh, ditto, brother. Ditto.
Thank you so much for joining us today. If you want to put what you've heard here today into practice, sign up for our newsletter, The Leader's Handbook, where each month you'll receive just one email with a curated selection of the most useful tools and practices discussed on this podcast today and over the course of the last month, delivered in simple how-to worksheets, videos, and audio guides, so you and your teams can try and test these out in your own life and see what best serves you. And lastly, if you want to be a vector for healing our politics, if you want to do your part, take out your phone right now and share this podcast with 5 colleagues you care about. Send a simple text, drop a line, and leave the ball in their court. Because the truth is, the more those around you do their work, the better it will show up in your life, in your community, and in your world. Have a beautiful day. As leaders, we all face contentious situations. As an Aspen City councilman, I navigated some of the most contentious STR and land use conversations in a generation. And while most were engaged in a food fight, profit versus community, Skyrun Vacation Rentals, a company built on community-first values for 20 years that I know personally, helped me find a solution that created positive outcomes for everyone. If you want responsible vacation rentals in your community to strengthen the local economy, Skyrun is the vacation rental company for you. To experience their commitment to care and community up close, use code HOP15, that's Healing Our Politics 15, for 15% off a stay at one of their locations, whether for yourself or someone in your community. There's a link in the show notes below. Feel free to share it. The Healing Our Politics podcast is brought to you by the Elected Leaders Collective, the first leading and most highly recognized name in mental health, well-being, and performance coaching for elected leaders and public servants, designed specifically for you. Now, don't be fooled by the name. The Elected Leaders Collective is not just for elected leaders. It is for all public servants, staffers, volunteers, government, nonprofit, whole organizations. This is for you. If you are filled with passion for improving your community and world, but are tired, as I am, of the anger, stress, and vitriol, if you find yourself banging your head against that same wall, struggling with the incoming criticism and threats, arguing with colleagues who are supposed to be on your team, and questioning if it's even worth it anymore, then the Elected Leaders Collective programming is specifically for you. With the Elected Leaders Collective, you will learn to become a hashtag political healer, building the authentic, unshakable confidence and courage to stay true to yourself through the anger and pressure, while cultivating the open, empathetic mind to meet others with the curiosity, compassion, and kindness necessary to respond to threats, improve challenging relationships, de-escalate conflict, and bring people in your community together to solve real problems and get shit done. You'll reduce stress, anxiety, and overwhelm, and become a more effective leader while having time for your family, yourself, your health, and your wealth, sleeping well at night, and showing others they can too. Now that's leadership. Healing Our Politics listeners receive 10% off all Elected Leaders Collective services using the code hashtag political healer. Use it today and become one of the brave political leaders healing our politics. Use code hashtag political healer by going to www.electedleaderscollective.com and starting today. That's www.electedleaderscollective.com and starting today.